as the full moon rises through a strange forest on a lonely road. At the signpost ahead, you have come to your final destination. Welcome to Greenwater Nightz with Sam Ritchie. Now, here's your host, Sam Ritchie.
Hello, my name is Sam Ritchie, and you're listening to Greenwater Nightz, broadcasting deep within the recesses of the Cascade Mountains, where normal and bizarre blend together, and what is taught as fiction, and where myth now becomes reality. Welcome to the world I live in, along with my friends, where the Bigfoot and the little people are real, and ETs and UFOs abound, where strange lights and orbs appear, and yes, even portals opening up to reveal other worlds. An area not for the faint of heart, but for those seeking the truth, and in the process making astonishing discoveries about ourselves. Well, here we're talking with Thom Cantrall, and you were on my program, the premiere episode of Greenwater Nightz, and talking about the conference down in Georgia and the highlights about your life and about your interactions with the Sasquatch. So today you are involved in another project, and I wanted to get into that a little bit, so go ahead, Thom.
Well, hello everybody, and thank you for having me again. The project is called Sasquatch From Myth to Mystery, and it's just completed. It's available now as a first edition, just by going to my website and ordering it there, or you can get it from Amazon as well. But basically, it's a little more specific than what we talked about last time. In this work, in this book, we get into the nature of Sasquatch, what he is. It's kind of, I tout it as what is Sasquatch? Where does he live? How does he survive? Is he an ape or a form of man? Is he vicious or is he benign? Why don't we have a body? Why don't we have a clear photograph? If he is more than an ape, why doesn't he live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend of man? Can he speak? Does he have a language? Is it merely a spoken language, or is it written as well? Where does he go in the winter? Does he migrate? Can I meet him? And if these are the types of questions you have, this is the work that you should have. This is quite an important volume in that respect. It has come to me very rapidly, I might add. I probably wrote this book in 3 weeks, maximum, from start to finish. And for a 225-page, 50-some thousand word essay, that's quick writing. But it's important. The concepts that are presented are very important. They're something you need to understand if you want to advance in your a relationship with the Sasquatch people. How do you go about meeting him? Very, very important. Is he vicious? Should you be afraid of him? Very important concept. Let me answer that in one word. No. He's not vicious. He's very benign. The problem that stems from there is our own mind. What we preconceive is what we're going to see. If we go out there thinking that we're going to see a monster, that we're going to be threatened, that's what it'll be. You'll find your monster. Doesn't mean that he is, it just means that that's what you'll see.
Right.
Many years ago, a psychology professor was doing a study, and he took a group of inner city youth, and showed them a teddy bear and asked what it was. Over 90% of those inner city youth, ghetto youth, identified that teddy bear as a rat. Why? Because they knew what rats were. They lived with them. They'd never seen a teddy bear. That teddy bear was totally foreign to them, did not enter their mind at all. You are a product of your life. You will think in terms of what your life has been. In 2014, I was in Northern California with a group of people camped, and we were returning to our camp, came around a curve in the road, and there were two Sasquatch standing directly in the road right in front of our car at 20 feet. The lady in the passenger seat, the lady who was riding shotgun, saw them and just screamed out, "Sasquatch! Bigfoot!" That was at milepost 14. We were camped at milepost 33 at the end of the road. By the time we had gotten from that milepost 14 to our camp at milepost 33, her mind had convinced her that she had not seen two Sasquatch standing in the road. She had seen two Mexican drug mules wearing long-haired ghillie suits and flip-flops with backpacks on. Why? Simply because her mind knew what those were. They didn't know what her mind did not know what Sasquatch was. She had come to be at that outing from England. She had never had a face-to-face encounter. All she knew was what she'd learned by study and by trying to encounter these creatures, these beings.
Right.
That's what your mind can do to you. That's how your mind controls you.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, we see that so often with the fact that there's no point of reference for these people at all.
That's exactly right.
I had people out here, well, I saw a bear, because I think part of it has to do with the person's mind being used to being open to new concepts. Unfortunately, I think what happens is people get conditioned to have a closed in-the-box type of thinking that doesn't accept anything outside of that. In other words, instead of the mind trying to form a new pattern of what something could be, possibly, all it does is try to go in the database and pick the next closest thing that it looks like. And I think that's the difference between the open-minded people and the ones that tend to be closed-minded. Not to say that those people will ever be open-minded about it, but that's one of my observations about that.
And I agree with you totally. I had a full professor, tell me, you have never seen a Sasquatch in your life. All you have seen is bears that you thought were Sasquatch. I said, really? I've lived my life in the woods. From the time I was 4 years old, I was in the woods by myself. I grew up there. I worked there all my life. You're going to tell me that a being close enough to me to hold my hand, I'm going to mistake a bear? They don't look alike. A bear has a snout. Sasquatch doesn't. Bear have no shoulders. Sasquatch do. How can you mistake that? And this is a full professor that's trying to convince me that. I said, have you ever seen a bear in the wild? Well, yes, I have. I was in Yellowstone. I said, at what range? Well, he was across the field. I said, try it at 20 feet and see how easy it is to misidentify. Yes, you can hang a bear up, that's been harvested, skinned out, And it looks like a man hanging there. It really does. First time I saw it, it was kind of startling, actually. But when you're at 20 feet from the thing and he's still got his hair on, and it's just no comparison. They're not the same thing. Now, can a mistake be made if there's heavy brush and you see a dark figure charging through the brush? Yes, it can. But I'm talking about wide open, point blank range, face to face. Like I said, close enough to hold my hand. That's no bear.
Yeah, that's amazing, because if you have an experience and you try to go and tell someone about it, or you try to find somebody in authority, someone academic or whatever, they're trying to push a narrative that you didn't see this, you actually saw something else. I think it's just part of that suppression. I don't know why that exists. In general, it's just that there's a resistance to something new. Something that the Sasquatch has been around for eons, but yet, for some reason, we all seem to be under this veil of no knowledge about them, or that it's a myth, as your book alluded to, from myth to mystery, of the fact that they do exist. And you got to get past expecting an authority to tell you that it exists. If you see it with your own two eyes, 20 feet away, you know what you saw. Just like each of us that have had personal experiences with them and saw with their own two eyes. We know what we saw. We don't need to worry anymore about people telling us that they don't exist or that there's something else, because once you've seen it, you don't need proof anymore. It's a personal experience.
No, and that's one of the great questions in life. You know, prove it. Well, no, I can't prove anything to you. All I can ever do, the best I can ever do, is offer evidence. It's up to you to determine how much evidence you require to constitute proof in your own mind. That's why there are 12 jurors on a jury, because for each person there is a different level of evidence needed to provide proof. We're all different. We all see things differently.
Yeah, there's different perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just like those children in the ghetto. Their perspective on what that creature was totally different than what yours and mine would be, because they were raised differently than we were.
Right.
And never expect confirmation from an authority. Okay? The first rule of thumb in any governmental organization is don't make waves.
You know, yeah. Especially like forest rangers, when they do see these things and they find out in a hurry that if they try to report this as, well, you didn't see what you saw and don't put it down in the report. There's a suppression of information.
There is. I worked with the Forest Service for years and years and years as a contract logger and a forester, and I've known any number of people in the field who have had personal experiences. But as they told me, you don't take it to the office. You know, they know it exists. They just don't want to have to accept responsibility for knowing that it exists. What civil servant ever wants more work?
Oh, of course. You know, if I value my job, I'd probably keep my mouth shut too, but it would bother me that I couldn't tell the truth about it.
Well, you know, and that's why, one reason why I could never work for the Forest Service, aside from the fact that I have more than 9 functioning brain cells.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, yeah, hopefully. We all have. With interjecting here about, I had a chance to read part of the book. Of course, I'm trying to go through it as quickly as possible so that I can be halfway intelligent in this interview about it. But what I do appreciate about the book is that with all the books out there, I'm getting tired of the question, do they exist or do they not exist? It's almost as lame as the question people still ask, do ETs exist? And I'm just really tired of the same basic question that people throw out there. And I'd like to move past it. And your book, of course, is suited the fact we already know they exist. So we're moving on to the next question. Well, since we know the Sasquatch exist, your book is now addressing about the nature of Sasquatch, about, okay, if they exist, how are they similar to humans and how are they not similar to humans? About their special abilities, why is it not too much out of the realm of possibility they can do certain things? And that's what I appreciate with several aspects of what they can do. And there's certain things they can help humans with as well. So can you address some of those things for me?
That point is totally valid. I have moved beyond the point of they exist so far that it's one I refuse to even acknowledge anymore. If the person talking to me wants to argue their existence, he can go somewhere else, because I'm so far beyond that point that it's just immaterial. If you don't know they exist, you're not going to understand the next thing I say. Okay? You're not going to understand that these beings are the best in the world at herbal medicines. That these beings have abilities that will blow your mind if you're around them. And I'm not talking about seeing one cross the road in front of you in your car. I'm not talking about, oh my heavens, I was in my tree stand and something went through the brush. I'm talking about Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall type observations. I have 61 years that I've been doing this, and I've had the opportunity to do exactly that. Not to the level that they did, certainly. Number one, there just aren't the populations there are of the chimpanzee or the gorillas like there were for Dr. Goodall or Dr. Fossey. But I have had the opportunity to sit and observe them without them at least making known that they knew I was there. Okay. I like to think I was hiding and was able to observe them unobserved, unknown. I'm not sure that's true, but it's a fun thought. But it's happened. I sat at one time for over 30 minutes and watched two of them feeding in a little area of blow-down trees. They were feeding on the oyster mushrooms there. And I was able to observe how they interacted. The fact that they had a child with them, an infant actually, with them, that I didn't see until the wind finally changed and brought my scent to them, and they busted me. And when they did, they left. But before they left, of course, the female picked up the child, which was the first time I had seen it. Another time, I was elk hunting actually with my bow, and sitting and watching a trail above a creek. And the creek was a series of beaver dams. And a group of 3 came up the creek, running salmon up against the beaver dams and picking them out of the water. And I watched that for well over a half an hour. So I've had opportunities, and that's only 2. I've had others as well, opportunities to sit and observe them being themselves, doing what they do. And that is totally, totally essential if you're going to understand what they are.
I have a basic question for you, though. And
yeah.
Between you and me, of course, we know the answer to that. First of all, we acknowledge they exist because you saw them, or others have seen them as well. But if I were to ask the basic question, this is, were you observing them acting as animals do, or more or less like humans do?
That had to be like humans do. Let me explain that just a little bit. That when they were fishing, they would pick up the fish and between his arm and his body, he would squeeze it. Some he would keep, some he would throw back. Okay? It puzzled me, and it took me several minutes of watching this before I finally figured out what he was doing. He was squeezing them, and if no eggs or sperm came out, he threw them back. They were spawned out. And as you know, salmon, well, after they spawn out, they die. And in dying, what they do is they actually develop a form of cancer in their body, their whole body. Living where you live, you know exactly what they look like and what they smell like after they've spawned out.
They're pretty worn out, and they start turning white on the outside of the body, and
that's right.
The fins start deteriorating.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They have a cancer that attacks them. I wouldn't want to eat them either. Okay. They knew this. Okay. He was squeezing those fish to make sure they were fresh. The fresh ones, he slid open the belly. They kept the heart, and they kept the eggs if it was a female. Okay, discarded the rest of the entrails, split the fish open, filleted it in half, and laid it across the limb to dry, like the Indians do, Indian style. And I've always wondered, did the Indians learn that from them, or did they learn that from the Indians?
Well, I think they've been around a lot longer than the humans since. And you'd be surprised. Maybe the Indians did learn that from them, the American natives.
I think they did. I think that was where that came from. It could have been, learned independently, but certainly I believe that the Sasquatch were doing it long before there were any what they like to call Native Americans, which is a total misnomer, since if you're born here, you're native, and they just caught an earlier boat than our people did. There's
Yeah. I know that one time, through a succession of events, that you eventually made contact with the Sasquatch, and you started appreciating some of their abilities. What I'd like to go into is, we talked before the show interview, and you wanted to get into the first chapter about what is called the miracle of Broken Arrow. Would you like to talk about that? I think that had something to do with the heat.
Yeah, I do, and that's a story that's essential to understanding why I feel that these people are benevolent and not demonic, because nothing that's demonic would ever do what they did during this period. It happened a few years ago. I was in camp with a group of friends, part of the old Oregon Sasquatch group, Autumn Williams group. We were camped on a river in western Oregon. We were just southwest of Hood. And when I got there, my friend and research partner, Sue Funkhauser, was with me. We went together. When I got there, I was not feeling good. My heart's in atrial fibrillation 100% of the time, and sometimes it runs better than others. If you don't understand what that is, it means the top half of your heart is not beating. It's just fibrillating, just quivering. So all the blood is being pumped only by the lower half of your heart. The biggest danger there is that blood in that upper half isn't being moved, and blood, when it's not being moved, has a tendency to clot. Okay? If one of those clots breaks loose from the heart and tries to get out, it will clog an artery, and it's fatal. Yeah. So it's a problem that I deal with all the time and have constant treatment for. I take a massive amount of blood thinners that keeps my blood from clotting. And of course, it was actually a rat poison that this was derived from, and it did exactly the same thing in rats. It kept their blood from clotting, so any break in the vein and they bled out entirely. That's what killed them. So it's not quite the same dose that the rat got, but then, of course, I'm a little bigger than most rats. But that's what
You're still here.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah.
We were in camp. There were 10 of us in camp. there. And the second day, I was feeling absolutely terrible. I mean, really terrible. I had told Sue that I thought we would spend the night and then we'd have to go the next day because I thought I'd be in the hospital that next night if it was that bad. Even Jeff Rohn, who was our host, told me just recently when I contacted him for some specifics on the camp, things that that I wanted to clarify before I wrote about it. He says, I told Jim, one of the other campers, that you look so bad that I was afraid he would be taking me out of there in the back of his truck. It was that bad. The first night there, we had activity in camp. Right in camp. Sue and I had set our tent up right on the edge of the landing where we camped. So we were overlooking the bluff where the logging had been done just below us. Everybody else was, I think the nearest tent was about 35 feet from us. So we were kind of by ourselves over there. I got up that first morning after the first night. There was tracks all around our tent, nice 16, 15-inch tracks. One of the cool things, this is a little aside, there's a bird down there, and it's called a nighthawk. It hunts at night, and it flies so very, very fast that the leading edge of its feathers, its wing feathers, will actually break the sound barrier. And to sit there and hear them at night is absolutely fantastic. You get a little miniature sonic boom from them. And you can lay there in the tent and hear them breaking the sound barrier, and it's cool. And we were hearing that night.
Our interview with Thom Cantrall will continue after this break, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Greenwater Nightz as we resume our interview with Thom Cantrall.
Second night, after I felt so bad, I wake up to hearing this hum. And my chest is vibrating. Sue wakes up and she's, "Where's that noise coming from?" I said, "It's coming right out of my chest." She says, "Really?" She gets up and comes over and puts her hand on my chest and it's vibrating. Okay. She looked outside to see if she could see anything and couldn't.
Right.
But we sat there. I thought it went on for 15 to 20 minutes. She said she had been awake for 2 hours listening to it before she spoke. And the next morning, when I got up, it was like I had been totally reborn. Now, it was still in fibrillation, but the rhythm was right, and it was beating strong. Okay?
So you were feeling more energy.
Oh, yeah. I could move, I could get around, I could do things. It was just, and it was unreal. And the funny thing about it, after the vibration stopped, of course I went back to sleep, but it was only about an hour and a half till daylight, and I woke up, and I heard somebody outside, so I got up and put my clothes on, went outside, and Jim DeMaine was just getting the fire building, and He says, "You look better today than you did last night." I said, "I feel much better." I hadn't told him what had gone on yet. He says, "Why were you and Sue walking through camp in the middle of the night talking?" I said, "We weren't." I said, "I never got out of bed. And Sue got up, but she never left the tent." I says, "We just weren't." He says, "I heard you guys walking through camp." And as I was walking up to the fire as we were having this discussion, and I was walking alongside of a double set of tracks in the dirt there. And so something had walked through camp. There's no doubt about that. In the book, I've got a drawing of the camp, how things were laid out, whose tent was where, and then the access and egress of the beings that were there.
Were there any footprints along the trackway of going through camp of any sort?
Yeah, 15, 16-inch footprints.
But not human tracks at all, just strictly ones that were large?
No.
Okay.
No human prints whatsoever.
I was just trying to...
And,
Yeah.
And then shortly, within 10 minutes after our conversation stopped, and Jeff Roan got up. "Why were you and Sue wandering through camp last night talking in the middle of the night?" Went through the same explanation. Maggie got up. "Why were you and Sue?" Robin got up. "Why were you and Sue?" Peter got up. Nancy got up. Of the 10 of us, 2 people had not heard Sue and I walking through camp talking. Everybody else did, with the exception of 2 people. One, Danielle had her tent on the other side of the landing, remote, away from everybody, and didn't wake up, didn't hear it. 2 was Ernie Vargo. He was in the same tent with Jim and Jeff, but he takes a sleeping pill, so he hears nothing from the time his head hits the pillow till he gets the last one up every day.
No.
So those 2 did not, but everybody else did. Now, Sue and I never heard talking. I mean, if we had, we'd have been out to see why we were hearing ourselves, But I asked her, I said, "If we were talking, what were we saying?" And the answer came back, "Well, we don't know what you were saying, but you and Sue both have very distinctive voices, and we could hear you talking." And it was fantastic to hear this. And here's these tracks that came from our tent, around the fire, and out the main road, right through the middle of everybody else's tent. And evidently they were mimicking us the whole time they were doing it. They came back 2 weeks later. We were in another camp, same group of us. We were in northern Idaho, up on the Continental Divide. And same thing happened. Not as long and not as loud, but they came back again, and it was like an adjustment. And ever since then, every now and again, if I get feeling bad, it'll happen again. But I have a picture of my chest taken the next day, and you can see a red mark right in the middle of my chest, right above the sternum, and that's where the sound was emanating from. And that's in the book too.
Yeah. Well, you revealed a couple of things about what they're able to do, and first of all, about the voices that you've heard that sound like you and Sue. I mean, that was the same thing that happened at the Barb and Gabby camp out, where they were talking like, well, we heard you talking out in the middle of the night, like walking by our tent. So this ability to mimic and talk like other people is surely within their capability. And I believe and the fact that they were aware of your condition. And do you feel that they were able to somehow use their hands on your chest or something to create the vibration, or you think they were just nearby and were able to do the healing work?
I think they were nearby, and I think it was sonic.
No.
because of the vibration rate, and I think that's what the sonic buzz is what vibrated the chest, which might basically massage the heart.
And I hear this a lot. Other people, other researchers that have direct experiences, once in a while I hear that in the cabin. I hear the buzzing, almost like, an electric razor or something when it's on, or when it's vibrating, you got the
Right.
And sometimes it goes in your ear, and sometimes on the other side. But this thing about vibration, which kind of confirms maybe that frequency and vibration has everything in the world to do with healing people. Yeah.
I really think it does. I think that resonant level is very important in healing.
Absolutely. So, do you want to address anything else about healing, or would you like to address something else about them?
That's just one aspect of healing. I've had. I wasn't going to talk about this when it's in the book, but I do think I'll mention it. I was in Georgia in 2016, and my shoulders were both very bad. I ran chainsaw for many years, falling timber, and it wore out my rotator cuffs. I had no rotator cuff in either shoulder. I had scheduled for the 29th of November to have my right shoulder replaced. But this was in October, and it was bad. I mean, pain levels of 6 or 7 with gusts to 14, on a scale of 1 to 10. It was terrible. I couldn't move my arm without shooting pain. I had arthritis so bad in that shoulder, they said it was even up on the clavicle, up on the collarbone. The arthritis had grown into that so badly. There was absolutely no rotator cuff left. It was just bone on bone. And if you look at an X-ray of the joint end of your shoulder, it's a smooth knob. What mine looked like was more like a war club. It had these protuberances on it. And of course, every time it moved, it dug into bone, and the pain was terrible. Well, Bob Gimlin and I flew from home here in Washington down to Georgia for a meeting with our group of friends we have down there, and they had put us up in a little park-like setting there, a cabin, rented us a cabin, and my room had a balcony on it. And first night, I'm just in bed. I think I was probably still reading. Maybe I'd turned the light off, but bang! There's a knock on the window, and I wondered what it was. Didn't know. I thought maybe it was a critter out there some type. So I left the light. I had finished reading because the light was off. I left the light off, and I got out of bed and walked over to look out the slider onto the balcony. The way this cabin was built, the front of it was at ground level, but the back of it, where my bedroom was about 10 feet off the ground. It was, kind of like you'd build a daylight basement type thing. Mm-hmm. And I didn't find I thoroughly expected to see a raccoon or a possum there, but I didn't see any animals. But what was there was a pine cone. Something had thrown a pine cone and off the window. And I knew what it was. I said, "Okay, guys, I got you." And I said, "I'm in a lot of pain here, so please be careful. I want to have to get up, And the pain started easing off. Where I was in pain constant to, say, a level of 6 or 7, with gusts higher, it eased back down. By morning, it was back down to 2 or 3, and my left shoulder even less. But then during the day, with activity, of course, it would come back. But at night, they would ease that pain off. The last night we were there, just to make this story shorter, I'm laying in bed, I'm getting the pine cones every night. This particular night, I'm just drifting off to sleep, and it was almost like a dream. But I'm sitting there looking at a control panel. It's a control panel that looks a lot like the missile firing control panel in the submarine that I was on.
Mm-hmm.
And it had the registers there and the displays, everything like that. But it was foggy. I couldn't really see it that clearly. There were people working at it. I could just see their backs. I couldn't see what they looked like. But I could see hands flipping switches and punching buttons and such like that. And for probably an hour, I watched that. And by the time that faded away, the pain was almost totally gone. And actually, so much so, from that day on, and until the 29th of November when I had surgery, I really had no more shoulder pain. Okay, I had the surgery and it went away entirely, and I have not had any pain in that right shoulder since. The left I still get pain in because I haven't done anything with that, but by getting the right fixed, it took the pressure off the left. It's kind of retired now, and I don't have to use it as much since I'm right-hand dominant anyway. But I've always got the feeling that I wasn't supposed to see that console. So I don't know what happened.
So this was,
but I know who did it.
So this console was kind of like nearby in this.
I don't know if I was taking somewhere else or was in my mind or memory. I don't know.
Yeah, who was manipulating the knobs? Did it look like Sasquatch, or did you?
It didn't. It looked more ET than it did Sasquatch.
Yeah.
But the Sasquatch initiating it at that point.
Wow. Now that's
so yeah.
That's a new twist on this story here.
It is, and it's totally. That's why I was reluctant to even talk about it. But I was told I had to put that in this book, that it was time. Yeah. But they, just a couple of little short notes. My friend and Cherokee shaman, Arla, she called me one time, and I'm having terrible chest pains, heart pains. And I was just about to call 911 and go to the hospital. And she asked me how I was doing, and I told her I'm not doing good. I've got chest pains, and it's bad. I'm going to have to go to the hospital. She says, "Have you asked your teacher for help yet?" And on
around like, no,
yeah,
I didn't.
That was the final answer. No. And she just shouted out, "Red Stripe, Tom's heart is having problems and he needs help now. Those pains stopped like you turned a switch off."
Wow.
Just stopped. In 5 minutes' time, I was like I had never had a problem. It was unbelievable. That's just one time. There's been others. Now, I know there's going to be people say that you're crazy, you're imagining this. That's fine. They can say what they want. I know what I went through. Okay? And I've had people accuse me of lying. To what avail? Why would anybody ever tell a lie about something like that to start with, number one? Number two, I don't really care what they think because I know what happened to me. And all I'm doing is relating what happened to me. If a person can't handle it, that's fine. Go their own way. Don't bother me with it. I have not told these stories in these years because of this very problem. But my teacher has said it's time to tell them. It's time people need to know this. You've established the parameters. Now it's time to live up to them. And that's what this book is.
Yeah, I had to interject about something because I can attest to the fact that when we first met several years back, your health then compared to now is like night and day. I mean, there was some points in the past where you were virtually on your deathbed, and
two years ago they notified my next of kin and gave me last rites.
I mean, I've seen the turnaround, and someone says, "Well, you did this or that." I think it had everything to do with healing from them. That has taken you to the point where you were able to do the conference here in Enumclaw and remotely for the one in Georgia this past
October.
Yes. So, and I do remember that you were talking about there were certain things that your teacher you would inquire about, and he says, "Well, we're not going to talk about that right now. It's
Right.
We don't need to know that right now." So right now he's saying, "Okay, now it's time." So it seems like there's a time and place for everything.
It is, and it's, and having lived through it, it makes it even more amazing. Believe me, it's startling sometimes what happens, and I don't know how they do it. I just know it does. It happens, and where it comes from. That much I know, but how, I have no idea.
But we're getting clues. We're getting clues to that because on some of the, even on some of the research that's done in the healing arts, they use frequency, they use vibration to heal people. And with quantum research and everything else, there's confirmation about some of the things they're doing that this is not just a secret art that humans have no access to. I mean, these things are actually being brought up. They're being suppressed to a large degree, or they don't want that information out. They'd rather you keep pumping you full of whatever.
I have medications that I take that are necessary.
Right, of course.
My blood pressure requires medicating. The medication to keep my blood thin is necessary. For that, I have to see a doctor once in a while. But other than that, I don't see doctors anymore. I haven't found one since I left Tri-Cities that I trust, number one, and they certainly is not where I am. But you know yourself, a year and a half ago, I was in a wheelchair.
Yes.
Then I graduated to a walker. Today, I'm walking with canes.
Yeah, and I wasn't really trying to knock all pharmaceuticals. There's a balance. But what I see sometimes, the problem is, I know in my particular instance, I was on some medications that had to do with blood pressure. I choose alternative methods to dealing with the issue.
Right.
But unfortunately, someone like, as they start getting their 60s, and of course I'm getting towards my mid-60s, that I think back to my classmates, a lot of them by and large probably are taking 11, 12, 13 medications or more on a permanent basis, which, I see a problem with that. And that's why I don't have a lot of confidence in Western medicine, because you really got to watch what you're doing. But of course I was sidetracking here, because what we're really trying to talk about is the special abilities of the Sasquatch, and healing is one great one. We've already established the fact they're very intelligent. They're probably more advanced than we are in their form of thinking and their abilities. Is there anything else you'd like to bring out about from the book that highlighted some of their other abilities?
Well, I'd like to talk about what they are physically.
Okay. Shoot.
And to do that, I have to get into genetics a little bit, and this will be a short course.
Okay.
And in order to preface that, there are two types of DNA in our body. We have the nuclear DNA that we get half from our father, half from our mother. This is the DNA that you learned about in high school, where you made it a tall bean plant to a short bean plant, and you got so many tall ones and so many short ones and so many in-between ones. That's nuclear DNA. Okay. The other type is mitochondrial DNA, and that occurs in the mitochondria of the cells. It's the most prevalent. There's much more of that than there is nuclear DNA. It is hardier than nuclear DNA. It lasts longer after the body dies than nuclear DNA does. So consequently, it is the most prevalent tested. It comes to us directly from our matrilineal line. It has nothing to do with our fathers or grandfathers. It comes to us from a mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, and all the way back to the beginning, wherever that was. And so, when there was a fellow who wrote several books that probably everybody knows, named David Paulides. Dave was a Sasquatch researcher. He wrote 2 or 3 books on the Hoopa Project and his work on the Hoopa Indian Reservation in Northern California. Then he went back to his roots. He was 24 years policeman in San Jose, California. He went back and started investigating disappearances in national parks and found an appalling lack of interest by the authorities in these disappearances. Well, everybody immediately said, oh, that's all about Sasquatch. No, I was with David in Honolulu, Oklahoma at a conference there. We were both speaking, and I asked him about this. He says, this has absolutely nothing to do with Sasquatch. He said, I'm trying to get away from Sasquatch. He said, I wanted to delve into this subject, and that these stories have absolutely nothing to do with Sasquatch. But you still get arguments from the unwashed. You know, well, he wrote about Sasquatch before, so this has to be about them too. It's not. Okay. David had quite a bit of material that should have DNA that he had collected over his years. He looked for and found a doctor who, though not a microbiologist, was a veterinarian, graduated with super honors from Texas A&M University in animal science with a degree in veterinary science. Okay, this is a woman graduating with honors in a field that is totally dominated by males. Okay.
Right.
She found out very quickly after graduating that it wasn't going to work because she was allergic to her patients. Okay, and she kept getting sick from them. So she went back and learned about genetics and started a company, DNA Diagnostics, in Texas. And she did diagnostic work for the Texas legal system mainly. She even did identification work on the 9/11 victims. Okay, so she's fully qualified in what she does. She did not, at this time, have a belief in Sasquatch. Not at all. And would not test it. But she had known David, and David approached her with 4 hair samples. And so he says, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll do morphological testing on them. That, you know, shape, size, look at them physically and see what they are. She did. They came back non-human primate. They were not human hairs. That was all they could say. Unknown non-human primate is what they came back. She then decided to go ahead and do DNA testing on them. The DNA test came back pure human.
Wow.
Now she had a quandary. She had morphological testing said that they were non-human. DNA testing said they were human. What was going on? Well, she then got in and said, we've got to look at this further. They amassed 109 samples from across the country. They tested them in 24 laboratories. Well, one thing I want to say before I leave, the laboratories that did the testing on the hair, University of Southern California, Texas A&M University, University of Texas Arlington, East Texas University, all of them major universities. If you think she had misrepresented anything that they reported to her and they will not complain about it, probably at the top of their lungs, you're totally ignorant of what goes on.
Our interview with Thom Cantrall will continue after this break, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Greenwater Nightz as we resume our interview with Thom Cantrall.
They took those 109 samples, used, I think it was either 22 or 24 different laboratories, major universities, University of North Carolina, the major criminal labs tested these samples. They were not told what they were. They just were told, we need DNA testing on these samples. It was a totally double-blind study. Came back same way. What they found out was that in hair, which is what the sample David had, you cannot extract anything but mitochondrial DNA. So that's what they were getting. And the mitochondrial DNA was coming back pure human. The nuclear DNA, which they could get from some of the other samples they had, flesh, hair that still had the skin tag attached to it, you could get nuclear DNA from. They had a toenail even, and you could get nuclear DNA from. The nuclear DNA had markers in it that were not human. The sticker was, of the 2.4 billion samples in GenBank, they didn't show up.
There was no match.
There.
No match.
No match. No. So they have no idea where those markers came from. They're not human, but they're not animal either. Not any known animal either. Okay? That's the DNA as it stands today. Except that if you go back to like the DNA that was done on the hair that was removed from the Skookum cast, Richard Knowles' find. It was done by, I can't remember the doctor's name, at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. He said it's contaminated. It's human. A half a dozen other tests the same way, testing hair. It had to be contaminated as pure human.
Just because they didn't have something in the database that they assumed it was contaminated.
Well, at the hair they had was only giving them the mitochondrial DNA, so it was coming back human. It just that it wasn't contaminated. It's what it was. Okay. That's the quandary. The mother's side was human. We don't know what the father's side is. So it's a human hybrid. But what it's hybridized with, we don't know.
That's what gets me, because it's like the expectation is that if this is the case, that we're talking about the hybrid, they have to open up, they don't want to accept that possibility. And they just want to assume it's contaminated, but they're not accepting the possibility that if this was the case where the father was unknown, that means it's something other than what they have. This is what we're looking for in the first place.
Exactly. Exactly. Then the study gets into all sorts of, the journal Nature. There were 3 different referees that were supposed to be examining it. One of them accepted it immediately, saw what it was, signed off on it. The second one wouldn't even read it. The third one kept coming back like he was reading it, asking for more information, all of which was in the report. He hadn't read the report, but he was just obfuscating, trying to cover things up, to make it hard to understand. Okay. Yeah, it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yep.
The only person who read the report accepted it as real. And of course, this is a microbiologist that is I don't know if you understand exactly how they do peer reviews. The peers are done by, in that case, microbiologists who understand genetics and what was done in the testing and how everything was done. But the one, open-minded science, right, wouldn't even read the report.
You do have people that are always assuming, why can't we get hair samples and DNA testing? Well, all that stuff has been done, but what people don't understand, there is a concerted effort on the part of authoritative entities, whether they're academic, governmental, or whatever, for whatever reason, do not want information out about their existence. And you're going to take your DNA, it's going to be suppressed. You see it. I mean, you've been around the block a few times, you really can't understand that's what's going on. But those of us that have the eyes and ears and have seen, for instance, what you just brought out, it makes perfect sense.
You're right. And that's, keep an open mind, please.
Absolutely.
And we're going to go one step further here. There's an institution in Washington, D.C. that's probably the most renowned in the world for their scientific endeavors, the Smithsonian Institute. And they are guilty of the world's largest cover-up that's ever been perpetrated. I can show you volumes of newspaper articles written in the past 150 years on Sasquatch, I don't want to say Sasquatch, on giant skeletons that have been exhumed from, like, the Adena people in the eastern U.S., from the mound builders, one after another. Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, Richard Dewhurst have all written books on these things, have cited the newspaper articles talking about Dr. So-and-so of the Smithsonian, Dr. Hardlicker from the Smithsonian Institute. And the skeletons were sent to the Smithsonian for cataloging and for safekeeping and for study. I asked the Smithsonian today where they are. We never received any such thing. We have no idea what you're talking about. There has never been anything like that here. They're lying.
Oh, yeah.
They did have it. It was cataloged. It was recorded.
But they're assuming you don't know that. And the average person that's going to call us says, and I guess if you come up with some proof from the past, like a past article or a past publication that actually shows this and presented it to them, and they'll still deny it. I'll think, well,
Absolutely.
that's just, up and down, let's just say it's just fake information. It's fake news.
Right. Another one, the Lovelock Caves in Nevada. A race of red-haired giants, that's quote unquote, were destroyed by the Paiute Indians. Those skeletons, when they were exhumed, were sent to the museum at the University of California, Berkeley. That's that museum where they are today. We never saw any such thing. The question is, where do we go from here? There's a lot of people that want to do research, but they don't know how. There are some wonderful researchers. We're part of one group that's absolutely the best on the earth, Barb and Gabby group. They do it right. They find something, they will reenact it. They'll study it. They'll investigate it, and they'll chronicle it. Too many people, they destroy their evidence in trying to gather it. There's something called a trail of custody on every piece of evidence that has to be kept intact if it's going to be usable at all. Without that trail of custody, you have nothing. You can take the journal, and it's actually a video journal that Barb does, and that becomes testimony. Journals can become acceptable testimony in a court of law. I've seen it happen. I've watched lawyers go out of their mind trying to refute what was in a journal from 15 years before, and they can't do it because when it's recorded like that, dated, signed, there is no way around it. That's as good as if Christ himself were on the stand and making the statement. I want people to understand that when you find a structure and you go sit in that structure, you've just destroyed it for evidence purposes. Any DNA that could have been around it, you've just destroyed. The first thing you have to know is you have to learn how to protect your site. When we were at the lake on the east side of the mountains 2 years ago, when they last year wasn't it? When they first found the butt prints that were cast. Part of that scene, that site was lost just from people wanting to see what was going on. There was an absolutely beautiful handprint where the fingers were stuck down into the soil. Would have made a beautiful cast, and somebody stepped on it. Fortunately, they got at least a photograph of it, but that's all we have of it, of what could have been. So I would admonish people, if you want to investigate, get with a team. And in the book, I go through what should be in that team, what you need. You need a videographer. You need an audio person, somebody that can not only make recordings, but can subject those recordings to audio analysis and interpret what's going on there. There's just so much that needs to be known. If you're going to advance your cause, you have to do it in a logical, scientific way. My brother-in-law said doesn't count.
No, so it is kind of funny because you do hear that quite a bit. It says, I just heard my brother said this, or my uncle just told me about that, and that doesn't hold. That's just a second-hand or third-hand account of what's going on.
And that hearsay is what it's called. Hearsay evidence is not admissible in any court in the land. First-person accounts are admissible, but they're looked at with a jaundiced eye because there again, we all see things differently. You can take 5 people and have them witness the same event, and you'll get 5 different accounts on it. So you have to be careful there. The only real evidence is empirical evidence. That you can measure, you can reproduce, and you can quantify. That is irrefutable. It can be interpreted wrong, but as evidence, it's irrefutable.
Well, that's the first part, is data collection. I look at it that way myself, is whether it's video or physical evidence, the footprints, it's about preserving what you're finding and have it as high quality as possible without contamination or without distorting what you're looking at. You could always interpret something later, but usually interpretation is the subject of after you've examined the different aspects, like maybe you have footprints, maybe you have photos, and then maybe you have an audio recording of the same event, for instance. Don't worry about trying to interpret based on one thing that you're finding, the footprints. Get all your data together from all 3 aspects and then form an opinion or form something based on all three together. That's how I personally do my research.
I'm very, you're doing the same thing. You're chronicling your research.
Right.
And that's so very important. The word of mouth will only last so long.
And you forget, too. I know.
Oh, absolutely.
I know you're alluding to the Barb and Gabby group as one of the research groups that I'm associated with. I got my own as well. But the videos serve because we always document, well, this is the date and time when the videos went out, and they chronicleize the event. And they've been really good about going back, because sometimes I forget, and thank goodness I keep a copy of the video, or it's on YouTube or something like that, and I'm able to refer back and correlate time periods. Well, this happened during the summer. Well, let me go back the past few years. Did the same event happen around the same time the previous summers? So it spans a long period of time. You can't remember everything. That's why it's so important to document.
That's exactly right. How are we doing on time?
Well, we're kind of shooting towards about hour and a half mark, and I'm thinking that's would be a good time. So if you want to give it another 11 minutes or so, 11 or 12 minutes, and then what we'll do is talk about how people can actually get the book, because even with what we're talking about right now only scratches the surface of what I found reading your book. So that's how important this book is. So maybe you might have one other chance to glean something from the book you might like to share with the audience before we close out the interview.
Let's talk about telepathy. That should take us up.
That's a favorite topic.
Yes. I have a friend, Thom Powell. We got to be friends because we spell our name alike. We leave the H in. He does it because he's Welsh, and that's the Welsh spelling of it. I do it because, I tell people my mother named me Thomas, and over my 76 years, I've just kind of worn the as off, and it's just left Tom. So that's how my name got to be that way. But Tom wrote a book called The Edges of Science. A great book. I highly recommend it. In that book, he's talking with Cliff Barrickman. Now, I've known Cliff for a number of years, and I like the gentleman, but he's pure BFRO, and that means pure ape. And he just basically doesn't understand what he's after. He told Tom that telepathy was not anything more than one's own self-talk coupled with a healthy dose of wishful thinking. And I'd like to take great exception to that, because I guarantee you the telepathy I have received has had nothing to do with my own self-talk, and even less to do with wishful thinking. I have not only just received telepathic communication from the Sasquatch people. It started many years ago. One case that I'd like to tell about because it's so graphic. I was at a friend's house for dinner in the little town of Tenino, and I lived at that time in Chehalis. And if you're not in Washington, those are two small towns in southwest Washington. And between the two, coming from Tenino back to Interstate 5, is Old Highway 99, which was before the interstates, the highway system from Mexico to Canada. And this particular stretch of it's about 10 miles without a curve. It's concrete highway, and there are no curves until you get to Interstate 5, and then there's a little curve to align it to cross over the highway. I was coming back, and it was, Western Washington is wet. And this night, it was doing its best to hold that theory up. It may have been even expanding on it. It was raining hard. Well, rain on concrete highways is not the best thing, so I was driving pretty carefully. Below the speed limit. I think the speed limit was 60 on that stretch of road, and I was doing like between 50 and 55. And all of a sudden I saw this set of headlights coming up behind me at a very high rate of speed, probably in excess of 75 to 80 miles an hour. The truck went around me, and as it went around me, I just pulled over and let him go by. The voice came in my mind, slow down, he's not going to make the curve. So I did. And of course I didn't want to go around that curve because I didn't want to see what I knew I was going to see. As I came around the curve, I was greatly relieved. Of course, they did not make the curve, but they didn't roll either. They just spun out and were actually in the infield on the on-ramp onto Interstate 5. Of course, they were stuck because it was raining so hard and it was wet and they couldn't get out of there. But at least they were upright, and there was a truckload of 4 kids, been to the basketball game in Tenino, and were on their way back to their own home in Rochester, and that's a big rivalry between Tenino and Rochester. I stopped and made sure everybody was all right, and then told them I'd stop up at the convenience store right across the freeway and call a tow truck for them, and they thanked me, and I went on my way. But that was an example of telepathy. Slow down, they're not going to make that curve. I can give you a dozen of those that have happened through the years. That had nothing to do with my self-talk, nothing whatsoever. And it was certainly not wishful thinking, okay? When my teacher talks to me that way, it is seldom good news. So I will rule out wishful thinking immediately. And he's telling me things that I have never heard before in my life. So it can't be part of my own self-talk. Also, when he talks to me, it is, come to me here, come to me there, meet me at this place. It's never me going somewhere, it's always me coming somewhere. If it was self-talk, it would be me going there, not me coming to him. You understand what I'm saying there?
Yes.
So, I'm going to refute right there Cliff's statement.
Yeah, there have been plenty of examples of that. Even Barb had an instance early in her life where the same exact thing you were talking about, being on the road and then something telling her that an accident's going to happen in front of her.
Mm-hmm.
I think she related that at some point in time, or she may have told me that personally. But there are many, many, many accounts of people where it's usually sometimes attributed to psychic awareness, but I don't think there's much difference between that and telepathy of communication with another higher intelligence.
Yeah, I call it witness from the Holy Ghost.
Yeah,
you know, and
what's
many
wrong
get a
with
warning from. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just a different voice. You know, I got in real trouble with somebody in my church one time for saying it like that, but it is. I have a surrogate daughter that I love dearly. She and I were, you know, like father and daughter for so many years. And I met her, I was going home from work one Saturday night, and the voice said, go have dinner tonight. I said, I am flat exhausted. You know, it was like a week before hunting season. I ran the archery counter at Sportsman's Warehouse, and I was exhausted. I had been tuning bows and, you know, working with bows all day long. I wanted nothing more than to get home, put my feet up and rest. Go have dinner tonight. And that usually meant this little Chinese restaurant there in Kennewick that I frequented. I said, oh, I don't want to. I want to go home and I want to rest. Go have dinner tonight. So I long since learned not to argue with the voice. I turned around, drove back into town, and went to the restaurant. It turned out that Rhonda was my waitress. We're sitting there talking. She's just got to town. She was living at the Mission and working, because working in a restaurant, you never know what time you're going to get off. She couldn't use public transportation. The buses shut down in Tri-Cities, and, you know, with the when the sun goes down, the buses quit. There was a night transit, but they would show up and she wouldn't be done yet, so they'd just leave. So she was walking back across the Columbia River Bridge to Pasco to where the Mission is after she got off work. And at the time I had a larger place. I said, well, you know, I have a spare bedroom. Why don't you use that? it took a few meetings, and eventually it did. And it was, 9 years later, I think, that we finally each had our own place again. She really got her family back together and rented a house. They had the upstairs and I had the downstairs. That's just the way it was. And that all came about because I listened to that voice and went and had dinner that night.
That is amazing. People really thought about it. It's that little voice in their head, sometimes they call it that, that says, something's telling me to go there. And then you find out something really weird happened that, like, man, I'm glad I came here. But the little voice in my head told me to go there, and had I not gone there, I would never experienced meeting certain people, or it was almost like destiny, like it was supposed to happen, but you were supposed to go there. Well, Tom, I think we're getting at the end here. Like I said, we could go on for several hours just talking about what this book has.
Oh, yeah.
And
we've only talked about a couple or three chapters, and we've only just barely touched on those. I'm sitting here looking at it. There's, oh my heavens, the events of Dahlonega, which is that's a fun story. The time I met my teacher, the lady Rajase. You've got to read that story. Rajase was an 18-year-old female Sasquatch that I knew from the clan in British Columbia, and knew her father through her taking a mate. And you got to read the story. You have to know what's going on to understand these people. The title of the book is Sasquatch, From Myth to Mystery, meaning they moved out of the realm of myth. Now they're just simply mysterious.
So where can they get the book?
The book, you can go to my website, gosuburbiareads.com, and order it from there, or you can order it straight from Amazon. The advantage of ordering it from me is you get it signed. It is not available on Kindle yet, but it will be. This first edition is just out, and as soon as I get done with all the mistakes that are in first edition is a euphemism for meaning with all mistakes, but I'm going to go through and correct the 28 mistakes I found in it, and then I'll publish it to Kindle as well. Yeah, and so it'll be available in both. I may put this one on audiobook later on too. It lends itself well to it, because the information in it is so important for the serious researcher. If a person's looking for thrills, buy another book. Go buy a Thom Clancy or something.
Oh, yeah. We're not talking about a fictional novel. We're talking about something that's a nonfiction work that actually has real experiences and real information that people could use. I will say that also when I finally publish this podcast on YouTube and the other places where I place this, that in the description information, I'm going to make sure I have a link that people can click on and actually go directly to your website. Or I may
that'd
also,
be great.
Yeah, I'll have that, and also the Amazon link as well. So makes it a little bit easier, so people don't have to remember. And get it out that way. So I really appreciate it, Tom. I know this was a kind of a little bit longer interview, but I was so intrigued after the first hour, I didn't want to stop. I said, let's go on and talk a little bit more. So I'm going to probably
I thought we were running a little long there.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to to Michael Payton.
Okay.
Michael did the cover art on this book, and it is fantastic. It's an original oil painting that he did for me for this book, and you have to see it to believe it. It is absolutely fantastic.
Okay, Tom. Well, thanks a lot. Stay tuned next time for another episode of Greenwater Nightz. I'm your host, Sam Ritchie. Take care, and we'll talk to you all later.